Hello, Sarah of SEK Handmade here. And you guys, I am so excited. I am incredibly passionate about pattern testing. I love to be a pattern tester. I don't do it as often as I used to, which makes me a little sad, but I love testing patterns for other designers. And I am eternally grateful to every pattern tester who raises their hand and says that they want to test one of my patterns. It is such an important part of I'm getting good at saying this, ready? The pattern publishing process. And really so important. And I am so excited to be spending this whole month talking about pattern testing. On Friday evenings, I'm releasing all of my tips and tricks about pattern testing and things to think of, because if you watched my first video, you know I went into my first pattern test completely blind. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And so I want to give you all the information so that you can go into pattern testing with open eyes. And one of the ways that I'm doing that is that this month I am doing my Meet the Maker interviews, which you know I love, with pattern testers, which is awesome. I found some pattern testers who are willing to talk to me about their crafting experience. And a lot of designers are pattern testers, but I really tried to seek out people who pattern test but don't design. I'm going to say yet, because a lot of pattern testers turn into designers. and get their perspective just from the pattern tester side of what it is like to be a pattern tester. I am so excited to welcome Amy here to talk to us about pattern testing. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk to you about pattern testing. As you just heard, I'm like super excited about pattern testing. It's a passion of mine. So I really appreciate that you were willing to join in here and share your perspective.
I'm really excited to be here. Anyone who follows my feed at all knows that I pattern test a lot, probably too much. My husband would tell you I overcommit myself. So I'm working on that this year and I'm doing a good job. I'm still pattern testing a lot, but I am scheduling it much, much better. So
I'm a fellow overcommitter right here. So I feel you.
It's so hard not to. I scroll through my feed and I like that one. I'm going to apply for that one, but I like this one too. So maybe I should apply for this one. It can get overwhelming. And sometimes you apply for one and then you go, oh, wait a minute. I got picked for that one. I forgot all about it. So
yes,
I still enjoy it. I figure I'm going to crochet anyway. Might as well test some patterns in the process.
That's awesome. That's perfect, because the thing that I'm talking about on Friday in my video where I'm sharing about pattern testing is how to decide if a pattern test is right for you. So one of the things that we talk about is timing and time management, because have I gotten myself in trouble there sometimes.
I'm right there with you.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad to have you here. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever you want to share, hobbies, family, where you live, what you do, anything you feel comfortable sharing is great.
Sure. My name is Amy Brown. My handle is Brown Eyed Crochet Girl. So it's a little play on my last name. And also my husband tells me that the first thing he noticed about me were my big brown eyes. And he always sings the Brown Eyed Girl song to me. So it just seemed appropriate when I was trying to choose a name. Choosing a name was much harder than I expected. I went through dozens and dozens of names and nothing seemed right. And that one seemed to work. And I figured I can change it later if I want, but now I kind of like it. So I think I'll keep it. But I live in North Carolina for the most part and partially in Georgia. We live a very complicated life. That's what we tell everyone. It's confusing to everyone but us. We live primarily in North Carolina, but my husband has a son from previous marriage who lives with his mom in Atlanta. So every third week we spend in Atlanta with my stepson. So it's a lot of back and forth, a lot of time spent in the car since we go together. My husband and I were a little bit older when we met. I was I believe 33 and he was 38. So we both had our lives established. He lived in Atlanta. I lived in Raleigh, North Carolina. His job was here. And so he spent every other week here, which is how we met. We met through a mutual friend. And once we got married, then we had the challenge of, okay, where do we live? Because for the first, I don't know, 3.5 years of our relationship, I saw him every other week. And I would go down there sometimes. And in the summers, he would bring his son up here for a little bit. And so I got that interaction. But once we got married, I told him, I said, I want to be a part of my stepson's life. I don't want to have a stepson who I see a couple times a year and feel like my husband has 2 families. So it was a challenge because I worked in banking for about 15 years. And when you're working with people's money, they don't really like you to work from home. They like you to be in the office. So that complicated things further. I switched jobs and got into email marketing because, you can do that anywhere. Well, I found out that I hate email marketing. I did not enjoy it at all. And the company I worked for wasn't great. I had a boss who wasn't great. So a few years ago, right after my husband and I got married, things weren't going well at my job. And so my husband said, why don't you just quit? Just quit. You take a couple of months off, figure out what you want to be when you grow up. I mean, I loved banking, but it just didn't fit our lifestyle. And so that was hard for me. I'd never not worked before. I mean, I think I had my first job when I was 14 or 15. So I did. I quit my job, and then, it took a couple of months just to kind of breathe. We had been through a lot before we got married. My husband was diagnosed with cancer, went through a major surgery, recovered, was doing great. So it was really nice just to have some time to breathe. But then I think my husband realized, oh, wow, it's really nice to have her take care of everything at home and her help out with my son. And so we both just kept finding excuses for me not to find another job. My husband then decided to do an Ironman. So if you know anything about Ironmans, it is quite the training commitment. So he said, well, why don't you just wait till after my race and then get a job? So we did that. And then it was one thing after another. Well, why don't you wait until this? Why don't you wait until this? And then COVID hit, and we were doing school from home with my stepson, and we were bringing him up here to Raleigh a lot more. I was pretty much the teacher, which was a bit of a challenge, but we made it through. And so at this point, just with our crazy lifestyle, until my stepson gets a little older, I am pretty much I am handling both houses. I do a lot with my stepson to free up my husband. I do most of the driving back and forth from Atlanta while he takes calls for work. And so that's our kind of crazy life of living in 2 cities, 2 states, actually. But North Carolina is home for me. And that's where we are now. It's where we'll spend most of our summer. And I know we'll get to this later, but it was right after I quit my job that I did my first pattern test and decided that I loved it. So let's see. As far as hobbies, my hubby and we're pretty active. As I said, he does Ironmans. I ran for a little while. I don't love running, though, especially in the crazy North Carolina humidity. But we do like to cycle. I do like riding bikes. My stepson loves to ride his bike. So that's something we can all do as a family. But other than that, sometimes it's a lot of traveling. I think I unpack my suitcase during the summers, and that's it. I have a suitcase packed the whole year. But so that's a little about me.
I love it. I feel the pain of being the what did I call it? The reluctant homeschooler.
Yes.
I knew immediately, almost immediately when my son was born, and I used to be a teacher. I knew almost immediately when he was born that I was going to teach him nothing. He was exactly like me and felt exactly towards me as I did towards my mom, which was always, I know better than you, and but then we trudged through for a whole school year.
How old is your son?
He is 10. So it was It was a lot of up and down. And let me tell you, never appreciated teachers more than I did this year when I got to send them back to school.
I will agree with you there. My stepson just turned 12, so he's just a little ahead of you there, but I'm sure it was some very similar challenges through that time. But yeah, the whole Common Core math, I still don't get that. I had to tell him, you need to call your teacher. Let's schedule a meeting with your teacher. She can figure that out for you. I don't do that.
Yes.
I do old school math.
So my husband is a chemist, and so math is a good part of that. And so there were days that I was like, this has to wait until Dad gets home. And there were concepts that my husband would explain to me, and I would be like, my brain just doesn't work that way, and I don't understand it. And also, I don't have to.
Exactly.
So you guys do you, and I'll be over here not understanding it, and I'm okay with that.
Exactly. I struggled with the book reports too, but my husband is the book report whisperer. I mean, he would take this book report that had some challenges, didn't really make sense. There were usually a few tears, not sure why. I mean, my husband was like, I'm just asking questions, just making suggestions. But 30 minutes and that thing would be sounding pretty good. So the book reports, I would be like, okay, you write it now, and then you and Daddy will look over that after school. Yeah, I didn't do well with that either.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. More tears probably all around that homeschooling year than any other school year. And it was tough, but I think it was good for all of us to just like learn, how do we get through these things together, and how do we deal with when frustration is up here? What do we do with ourselves? How do we cope with that?
Yeah.
So there
was lots and lots of wine that year. I'm not going to lie. There was a lot, especially because he would be with us for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. And then he would be gone for 2 weeks with his mom. And then he'd be back for 2 or 3 weeks. So like the 2 weeks he was gone, I would be like, okay, I can breathe. And then all of a sudden we're back to it. So, but that was a challenge too, we didn't have the cohesive, all right, well, I know what you did last week. I would be in it for 3 weeks, and then I wouldn't have a clue what he did for 2 weeks. So added challenge there.
Yes. My sister is married to a man with kids, and we have agreed that it's almost harder to go back and forth than to just be in it all the time. When you just don't know any different and you're just in it all the time, you're just like real laser focused. And that the back and forth it's a big challenge.
It is. And I know it's a challenge for the kids as well. Inevitably, the houses are different, have different rules, different expectations. I know that's a challenge for my stepson at times, but he's actually with us right now. I've exiled him to his room for an hour. It's reading time. He would be quiet while I take care of this. But we've had a really great time this time. I feel like, I don't know, 12 so far. I've heard that was the age where things start to get a little crazy and they start almost like becoming teenagers. But so far, I feel like I need to knock on some wood. So far, it's actually been really good for us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yes. I have 2 boys, and they are exiled to separate rooms.
Yes.
And my youngest's bedroom is right above me. So he's exiled to the guest room because he's like a real like mover, and no matter what he's doing. And so I was like, I can't have you above me, like tippy tapping.
Yes. Yes. My stepson came home with this like crazy colored bouncy ball, and he'll be in the dining room where his computer is bouncing it. You have to stop that. You're driving me nuts.
I love it. I love it. All right. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you learned your craft?
My grandma taught me to crochet. She did all the crafty things. The only thing she did not do was knit. And she was okay with that. Her daughter knit, so my aunt, and she said, your Aunt Sue can teach you to knit. I don't have any interest. I don't like it. I'll teach you everything else. So, I mean, she was very big into sewing and quilting. She made beautiful quilts. She crocheted. She did embroidery. She did tatting. I admire it, but I don't really understand that. It's something I never learned from her. But she taught me. I was very close with my grandparents. They were babysitters growing up. And so it was great. We had a really good relationship with our grandparents because we spent so much time with them. And so the summers were all about me and grandma crafting together. She taught me to sew. That one didn't stick quite as much. She taught me to quilt. That one did not stick, but I do have the quilt that she taught me on because she had given it to my mom. And when she passed, my mom let me have it. So I do have that, which I love. But the first thing she taught me was embroidery. I remember I was 6 because she also taught my cousin, who was several years older than me. And she had just one of those samplers that she taught my cousin on, and it was hanging on her wall. And she had my cousin embroider her name and age 7. And so when she taught me, I made a pillow, and mine had my name and age 6. And so I would tell her, well, I am better because you taught me younger. I learned faster. So I always remember that. I was 6 when I learned embroidery. So I was probably 7 or 8 when she taught me to crochet. I am not sure. I had done it for so long, but I did a lot of granny squares. Not really sure what we did with them all. I don't really remember anything evolving out of those, but I remember making a lot of the granny squares. But I just loved it. And my grandma just instilled just a love of crafting and making things with your hands. And, that was her. This is actually her picture right up there. I'm trying to point to I keep it in my craft room because she's the reason that I do any of this. Yeah, that's how I learned.
Oh, that's so wonderful. I love it when people have sweet stories of family members teaching them when they were young. That's funny. My mom sews and quilts as well, and she tried to get me into sewing and quilting. And I often think like, gosh, I sure would love to be able to like sew my own clothes and stuff.
Yeah.
But I've never gotten there.
I haven't either, but that's what my grandma did growing up. She would make all the clothes for her kids. And she loved to tell the story about how she always made my aunt's clothes. And my aunt just wanted a store-bought dress and wanted a store-bought dress. And so she bought her one, and she wore it once or twice and it started falling apart. And so my aunt said, okay, fine, you can make all my clothes. And my grandma was really proud of that. And I mean, she was great. I remember doing a book report in maybe like 6th or 7th grade. We had to do, it wasn't a book report, we had to do a report on a historical figure. And I did Clara Barton, who made the first flag. And my grandma made me, she made me a bonnet and this big skirt. And as kids, anytime we needed anything like that, I got this. And she would. So that's just another just great memory of, she could make anything. And she did. I have so many memories of her sitting in her recliner with a quilt all over her lap, sewing it together. Or you go upstairs in the bedroom and she'd have all the quilt squares laid out on the guest bed, how she was going to sew them together. It was just a common thing in her house. There was crafting everywhere.
I love that. So crochet is what really stuck with you from your grandma. Yeah. Do you have any other crafts that you enjoy doing?
Not really consistently. The crochet is really what stuck. I like being crafty. For my wedding, I crocheted a lot of stuff for my wedding. I made a shawl for my wedding. I made a little flower hairpiece. I went a little overboard. I crocheted little toppers for the pins, little flower toppers. Some of the signs I crocheted some flowers for on it. And I just really enjoyed just making a lot for my wedding, but that's not something I do on a regular basis. Maybe a little crafty project here or there for something decorative, but I mean, primarily it's just crochet and yarn. See, there's yarn everywhere behind me.
I feel you. So did you learn crochet and like just keep going with crochet, or did you have a time that you kind of like stepped away from it because it wasn't as cool and then came back to it?
Yeah, I did step away from it probably around high school and college, but not really because it wasn't cool. I just had other things to do. I was a ballerina in high school, and in my later years, I taught smaller kids, and I had my own classes, and I danced 5 days a week. So I just didn't really have time for it with school and everything. And then, excuse me, when I was in college, my senior year, my grandma passed away. And so when I finished college, I moved back home for about 9 months before I moved to North Carolina. And I found a blanket that was half done that my grandma was making. She was making it in panels. And so I found it and I thought, you know what? I'm going to finish this. So it was really great because I learned that I could follow a pattern. I never understood how to follow patterns before. So I was like, well, I'm just going to try. I know enough to, I know enough of the basic stitches. Let me try and follow it. So I was super excited because I could follow a pattern. However, I learned a lot about dye lot on yarn. I ran out of yarn. I went to find more, and it looked very different. And I also learned a lot about tension. Of course, I didn't gauge swatch. I didn't know what that was then. So grandma's panel was this wide, and mine was this wide. So needless to say, the blanket never got finished. I do still have all the pieces. It's one of those things when we clean up and purge and move, I can't get rid of it. I'll do something with it someday. I'm just not sure what. But that's what got me back into crocheting, and I've stuck with it ever since. That was, gosh, I'm embarrassed to say that was 20 years ago. So I got back into it. I did a lot of blankets and baby blankets. At that point, a lot of my friends were getting married and then having babies. So everybody got blankets for their wedding, baby blankets for their baby showers. And my best friend from growing up, she's been my best friend since preschool. I made her and her husband, I crocheted a big blanket for them for their wedding. And to this day, they're about to celebrate their 20th anniversary. They still have it on the back of their couch. And that just means so much to me to see that. So that's where I started. I don't make a lot of blankets anymore because they take so long. I did make one last year. My dad asked for one. He likes, because I make them really long for him. So he asked for one that I made, and I enjoyed it. It went faster than I thought, but it's probably just because I spend more time crocheting than I'd like to admit. But I enjoy seeing it take shape.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was mostly just blankets and baby blankets for years. And then maybe about 10 years ago, somebody sent me a pattern. I believe it was for a hat, and said, can you make this? And I said, okay, sure. So I made a hat, and then somebody else found a pattern for, do you remember the mermaid tail blankets that were really popular? Yes. Yeah, so someone sent me a pattern for that and said, oh, you should make this. And so I said, okay. And so I made it, and I think that's what really kind of propelled me back into crocheting on a regular basis, and just stepping out of my comfort zone of the blankets and trying some new things.
That's really cool. So how did your grandma teach? I'm going to step back a little bit. How did your grandma teach you to crochet if you didn't read patterns? Did you just make up your own shapes and stuff?
No, she would show me the stitches. So, this is how you do a chain. This is called a chain. This is a single crochet. So she would show it to me and then make me do it. And I would make swatches and just practicing the stitches. And then with the granny squares, she would just show me, this is the pattern. And I mean, to this day, I usually will read, like, I'll get the hang of the pattern and just go with it instead of looking at the pattern each line. So I think it's just how she taught me. It was just, here, this is what you do. And I would sit next to her. And so I'd get to a point and say, uh-oh, what do I do now? And she's, okay, this is where you make your 2 chains and then you turn. And so it was just basically, she would tell me what to do. And that's what I did.
I love it. I love it. That's cool. So she obviously read patterns, though, because
Yes.
she had that blanket.
She did. Yeah. She had a whole bunch of old books and magazines with crochet patterns. I have some of them. I don't know that I'll make anything out of them, but I love having them. She made a lot of those really intricate doilies too. I have a few of those. I have one over here in my craft room, but those I think are just gorgeous, with the lace weight yarn and the really tiny hooks. I didn't get into that for a long time, but they're just beautiful. And it just shows that I just showed her talent so much. But yeah, she would make a lot of that kind of stuff, and usually out of the crochet books and magazines that she had. And she had them all over her house.
That's great. Yeah, my mom doesn't crochet, and I don't know that my grandma crocheted, but my mom's grandma crocheted. And so we have all the doilies, all my mom has a
Yeah.
whole bedspread made out of thread, which like now that I know what it's like to work with thread,
Yes.
that blows my mind.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I as well appreciate that stuff, but haven't gotten into it quite as much. Though I do see recently people kind of modernizing that a little bit and making
Yeah.
really intricate, almost doily like things, but attaching them to a frame and making them into like wall hangings, which is
Yeah.
very intriguing to me. I'm like,
Yes, or like the
that's neat.
mandalas on
Mm-hmm.
the rings. I want to make one of those for my craft room someday if I can stop, doing so many pattern tests. Maybe I can make some things for myself.
You just need to find somebody testing one of those patterns.
Oh, that's a good idea. That's one I haven't seen yet.
Solution.
That is. I need to remember that. But yeah, I really want to make one of the mandalas. And I feel like with a lot of the yarn cakes with just like the fades and the color changes, they're just gorgeous in those
Mhm.
too. I do wish, looking back for my wedding, I wish I had made a white one of the, like a white or a cream colored mandala, and those just beautiful stitches. If I had it to do over, that's one more thing I would have made for my decorations.
I love it. I love it. So tell us about your first pattern test. How did you get into pattern testing? How did you even find out it was a
Sure.
thing?
So after I quit my job and I had some more time on my hands, that's when I was spending a lot of time making things for my wedding. Um, it's a little crazy. My husband and I actually, we got engaged on a Saturday and with no ring, and then got married at the courthouse on Tuesday, a week before he had major surgery. So once all of that was over and he was doing well, we then had a wedding. We called it our I Do Take Two wedding. And
I
so
love that.
it was great. It was actually really nice. I feel like it took a lot of the pressure off of the planning because we were already married. We were viewing it more as just a big party. So I was working on all of these. I was trying to find things I could crochet and make myself for my wedding. And so I was spending a lot of time on Pinterest and Instagram looking up crochet. So I was finding a lot, and I thought, maybe I should just post some pictures. Maybe I should make an Instagram account and post some pictures. So I did. And my Instagram account at the time was just my name. And so I started looking and I started following more crochet designers as I found new patterns and such. And then I started seeing pattern testers wanted, or, oh, this is a pattern test I did. And I thought, what is this? So I just kind of started stalking pattern test posts to kind of figure out what it is. I didn't know anybody in the crochet world enough to say, hey, can you explain this to me? I don't know what it is. So I figured I kind of got the hang of it. I got what it was by seeing enough people asking for testers and saying, this is what I'm looking for. These are the requirements. And I mean, at the time, I may have had 300 followers. I didn't have that many. I wasn't posting that much. I look back, my pictures were terrible. But I found a pattern test by Tanya at Pink Plumeria, Maui.
Yes, I love Tanya.
And
She's
so
so
I reached
sweet.
out to her and I was like, hey, I've never done this before. I've been crocheting for a really long time. If you're willing to take a chance on me, I would love to do it. And she's like, yes, please. And so I tested. It was her Maui Dream Shawl. It was the first one I tested. It was one that I knew I could do it. I knew that the stitches were stitches I was comfortable with. So I'm kind of jumping ahead, but that's actually like one piece of advice I would give to people getting into pattern testing. Make sure your first one is not like a big challenge. Make sure it's something you're comfortable with so you can get the hang of pattern testing.
Yes.
But so I did that pattern test for her, and I didn't really even know what all information she was looking for afterwards. And so, coming from my background in banking, I am kind of an organizational freak. I'm a little bit of planner. I like everything. I like any written communication to be very neat and orderly and have a flow to it and be pleasing to the eye. So I made this elaborate document of all the things I could think of. And I sent it to her. And then, I didn't hear anything for days. And I was like, oh no, did I offend her by something I said? And I freaked out. But then I realized, no, she just gathered all the info and when she was ready to move forward and work on the test, then she responded. But I was so panicked. I thought I did something wrong, and but I didn't. It was just, she had several pattern tests, a bunch of other things going on, and she didn't reply right away. She just put everything into a folder and then replied when she was working on it.
I think that's such a great thing to point out, because I do the exact same thing. My brain needs to be focused on the editing all at once.
Yeah.
And so people's responses will trickle in before the due dates. And I intentionally don't open them so that they are unread on my account.
Yep.
And then I sit down for, depending on the complexity of the pattern, for an hour or 2 or 3, and just go through every single person's, because otherwise somebody will say, oh, on row 2 you missed it should say 7 instead of 8, and then 3 other people will say that. But if I haven't done it all at the same time, I'll go, wait,
Right.
did I change that? Did I not change that? Did somebody else say that, or did they not?
Yeah.
So yes, that is an excellent point. Just because you don't hear from a designer right away does not mean that there's something wrong with your notes, or that they haven't gotten your notes.
Yeah.
I will always, if I go through all the notes and I haven't received from somebody, then I reach out to them and say,
Right.
hey, I've misplaced your notes somewhere. Can you resend them, sort of thing. So that's a great tip and a great piece of advice, because I hadn't even thought about that. But yes, and some designers will take your notes and never respond. I have definitely tested for designers. I think of people who do giant garments that they do from like baby all the way through, 5X adult. And I mean, you're talking,
a lot.
50 people on a pattern test. And so sometimes they just won't even respond. And you just kind of have to, like, I guess they'll reach out if there's a problem.
Yeah. So one thing that I do, and I know sometimes I'm sure it may annoy some designers, but since there's usually an Instagram chat, sometimes I'll say, hey, I sent my notes and pictures over. Let me know if you didn't get them. And the reason I do that, I had one time where there was a designer who I tested for regularly. So she was totally understood, but for some reason my email didn't go through. I have no idea. I don't know if it got lost in spam. Maybe I put a word in there, or it just, something happened. I had the timestamp showing when I sent it, and she reached out and she said, hey, I haven't gotten your notes yet. That's not really like you. Did I miss them? And well, I sent them. And she's like, well, I don't have them. Can you send them again? It was completely fine. Well, I still test for her to this day, but there's still that part of me that's like, oh no, what if they didn't get them? Now I don't worry that I vended them. I worry, what if they didn't get them and they think that I didn't finish? And that just, I like to confirm.
Yep. And I've had that happen from the other end too, where I reach out to somebody and say, hey, I'm going through my notes. I don't see your notes here. I always assume that it's a technology glitch. Can you resend them? And they've said, like, oh my gosh, I totally sent them, and they'll forward me what they sent. So it's very obvious that they did. But I mean, man, technology when it works is amazing, but when it doesn't, stinking technology. Or I've had people send notes and attach pictures that didn't come through.
Mm-hmm.
Or, or I have some testers who will print out the pattern and like write notes on the pattern and then scan it and send it back to me.
Okay.
And your email saying, thanks so much for letting me pattern test, yada, 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 comes through. But like, then there's nothing attached. So yeah,
I'm really bad about that, saying, oh, this is attached, and then completely forgetting to attach. I'm usually pretty good with photos, but documents, I'm so bad about.
I just responded to a contract with a yarn company and was like, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to do this. Attached is the contract. Send. Oh, nope. Attached is not the contract. Oops, sorry. Here for real is the contract.
And it's always the important things that you forget to add the attachments to.
Yes. And I think the point there is that, one, technology glitches are not your fault, so you shouldn't feel embarrassed about them. And two, it happens to everybody, and designers are people too. So even if you like the due date goes past and you're like, oh my gosh, I meant to send my notes and I didn't, just be honest.
Exactly.
Get it. I do stuff like that sometimes too. It's totally fine.
Completely agree. But yeah, so I actually, for the first year, Tanya was one of the only people I tested for a long time. But I appreciated, apparently, my notes did not offend her that day because she kept letting me continue to test for her. And I learned it. I feel like I learned a lot through her. And I I really appreciate that she gave me the chance when, again, I look back, my pictures were not great. I didn't have many followers. I wasn't really helping her with a lot of exposure. I could find errors and patterns as I was working through them. From my days in banking, I had some attention to detail, and I'm kind of the nerd who, when I was in banking, I loved writing procedures. I wrote like whole procedure manuals for our company, and so I was good at finding that kind of stuff. But I appreciate her giving me the chance, and even to this day, I know that people gave me a chance, and people still do. When I was learning Tunisian crochet, my first Tunisian test, I reached out to the designer and said, "Hey, I would love to test this, but haven't really made a Tunisian project before. I've kind of messed around with it. Would you be willing to let me test? If not this, maybe something else?" And she was, "Absolutely, I would love that. I want this to be a beginner-friendly pattern. So if you would test it, that would be great." And and now I love Tunisian crochet. I have like 2 projects going on right now, but it was because somebody gave me a chance. And I also recently volunteered for a pattern test for is a designer who it was her first pattern. And I thought, I want to pay it forward there too. I want to help someone, who's getting into this, because we all had to start somewhere. And so that's something that's important to me, just to make sure that I'm kind of paying that forward.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I think a lot of people see, well, first of all, the pattern testers who get kind of exposure,
Mhm.
and that you see a lot of times, I think give kind of an unfair isn't the word I'm looking for, but I can't think of anything else. An unfair perspective on what being a pattern tester is like. And I
Mhm.
think I think people see pattern testers and they look at like your gorgeous, amazing photos and think, well, I have to get to here before I can start pattern testing.
Right.
But that is not the case. I
Yeah.
think, I mean, I have some testers that I will have them on any test, and they
Mhm.
take okay pictures, but not amazing pictures. But their attention to detail is on.
Right.
Every time they will catch something that none of the other testers caught.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
like you said, depending on the pattern, I think pattern testers are, or I think designers are a lot more open to new pattern testers,
Mhm, I
people
would
who have
agree.
never pattern tested before, because they've been there too.
Yeah,
And the only way you get good pattern testers is by letting someone who's never tried it before give it a try.
exactly. Well, I appreciated with the Tunisian test, I appreciated her perspective where she said, "I want my pattern, I want it to be beginner friendly. So if I can have a beginner test it too, that tells me a lot." And there were a couple of things there were a couple of stitches that I was like, "I really don't understand this. I Googling it and I can't find it." And some other testers in the group explained it to me, and I thought, "Oh, okay." But she also adjusted some of her explanations then based on some of the wording they gave that helped me understand it, because as a beginner, she wanted to make it so that any beginner could understand it. So I think that was helpful. I like to think that was helpful for her as well. She let me test another Tunisian project a bit later too. So I guess that means I did okay.
Yeah, yeah. And that, I mean, that having one of the most important parts of pattern testing is having other people's perspectives, because you can
Right.
think as a designer, like, I've really explained that good. And then everybody gets it and they're all like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to
Yeah.
us. And so that's important to be able to adjust wording so that it's really the
Right.
most clear way to explain something.
Right. I was doing a pattern test. I think it was just last week, and there was a part of it that several of us had said, "Hey, this didn't quite work for us. This is what we did." And the designer was saying, "Okay, well, I appreciate that feedback. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say it." And so we were all throwing out some options, and then she's like, "All right, I think I took a little bit from all of them. I think maybe this is it. Take a look. What do you think?" And I like that collaboration. I love working with designers want your feedback, and really it feels like, okay, we really helped her in this, and just that collaboration. I mean, they're not going to use everything I suggest at times, but if it can help them get something more clear for other people, I think it's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I agree. Sometimes there are things going on behind the scenes as a designer that I don't think pattern testers necessarily see. Like I
Mhm.
have had some people suggest to me, "Oh, I would format this way." And I'm like, that's great, and I think that's a good idea, but also all of my patterns are formatted in
Right.
this one way. And so changing that for this, to me, because it's important to have
Yeah.
consistency, would change everything. So maybe that's something that I don't take. The other thing I think is, as a pattern tester, sometimes I feel a lot of pressure to have a solution to a problem I see. But
Mhm.
I think it's important to also understand that, like, you're not the designer as the tester, and if you can't come up with a solution, that's not really your job.
Right.
So if you have a suggestion of how, like, it might make more sense if you said it this way, but if you're just like completely baffled about, like, I don't
Yeah.
understand what's going on here, it's okay to say, I don't understand what's going on
Yep.
here, and not have a solution to that
Yeah,
then.
for sure. I would agree with that. There are sometimes you kind of figure it out as you're going, but you're like, yeah, I don't know how I would say that either. I don't know how you just figure it out by trial and error sometimes. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's really important, like you said, just to bring it up. And sometimes you might bring it up and someone else is like, oh, well, I understood it, but they might have a solution. Or the designer says, oh, I was wondering about that. I wasn't sure if that was a good way to say it. I've got some other ideas. So I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So, what would be your advice to either brand new pattern testers or people who are thinking, maybe I want to get into pattern testing, but I'm not really sure? What would you have wanted to know before you got into pattern testing?
Um, let's see. Well, as I said before, I think your first test, like don't like jump into Tunisian crochet when you've never done it before for your first pattern test, and choose something that you'll be able to make pretty easily, because then you can focus on the testing process. You can kind of just gain that experience. Not everyone knows that when we pattern test, then we have most testers do a separate Instagram chat with all the testers. And so you can bring things up as you go and dialogue. So I think that's one thing. Secondly, when I first started pattern testing, I tested for Tanya, and then when I started getting some other tests, anytime I saw a testing call, I was like, I need to apply for this. I need to do. And so I ended up testing things that I didn't love. And it's okay. You don't have to love every pattern. That's why there are so many patterns. They appeal to different people. But for me, sometimes I would get a project and it would feel like work sometimes, because it was like, I don't love this, but I just wanted to get my name out there. So I would say be careful about that. It's okay to do that for some small projects, but it is really hard to push through sometimes when you don't really love what you're making. So I think that's a good piece of advice. And then, kind of like I did, be honest with the designer and say, hey, I haven't done this before. I'm not 100% sure how to do it. Maybe, can you just let me know exactly what you're looking for? And so I think that's important too, because every designer is looking for something different. And that was part of my problem in the beginning. Since I am such a procedure driven person, every pattern test I did, I wanted to have this elaborate document of this feedback, and this feedback. But not every designer is looking for that same feedback. So it's not always a one size fits all kind of thing. Most designers will send you an email letting you know exactly what they're looking for. Some will want you to fill out a feedback form that asks specific questions, and others are like, I don't care, just send me whatever you have. And so I think just being flexible and just making sure you understand what the designer wants. And again, just being honest about your skill level and saying, I would love to do this. Were you willing to give me a chance? I think those are all just important tips. And then the other thing, too, for me, when I first started applying for pattern tests, I would see something and I would think, oh, I really want to test that. And I would apply and I wouldn't get chosen. And it really got to me sometimes. And I had to talk to myself and be like, it's okay. Like, you are still new. You're still learning this. It's okay. You're not going to get chosen for every test. And so sometimes you just have to not let your ego get bruised on that. It happens. Even now, I don't get chosen for every test that I apply for, but I have to know to let myself go, okay, I know I really wanted to do that one, but the pattern's going to come out. I can just buy it and still make it. So
yeah. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes with who gets chosen
yep.
for a pattern test. Some designers are strictly first come, first serve. I know people that like they feel like that's the fairest way to do it.
Right.
That who, if they have a small, medium, large, extra large, the first 2 people to sign up for small
Right.
get it. The first 2 people to sign up for medium. I know there are other designers who pore over every application to see who would be the very best fit for,
Right.
the pattern and their style and all of those things. Some designers have real unique but simplistic requirements that they're looking for something specific. And every once in a while, like I know, I'm trying to think, it doesn't matter. I think I was talking to a designer. I can't remember if I had applied for the test or if I kind of said like, oh, your pattern is really beautiful. I'm thinking about applying because I'm kind of at the point where like, unless I slow down my own designing, I don't necessarily have time for pattern tests, even though I'm still super tempted. And she said to me like, oh, I already have a tried and true tester who tests all of my patterns and she's the same size as you are. And my sister offered to test and she's the same size. Like I didn't have any control over that and that had nothing to do with me. So
exactly.
It definitely, especially when you were super excited to do it, it can feel like, oh, a little like, oh, stab in the chest that you weren't chosen. But sometimes it has literally nothing to do with you. 2 people got there before you, or her sister and her cousin are going to do it.
Yeah, and they're all your size. When you're a common size, that happens a lot. So I feel like I run into that with garments a lot, because I'm a common size. So.
Yeah. And some designers really love to stick with people who have tested for them before. And so like there's no getting in on that if you haven't tested and they have 3 or 4 people that they use all the time who just happen to be your size. So
it's true. Well, I will say there have been times too where I know years ago I applied to test for some people and I didn't get chosen, and I have tested for them recently. But I can realistically look back and say, yeah, I knew what my pictures looked like back then. Maybe I did need a little more experience. So, but to me, it's kind of an honor when you are chosen by a designer that you've admired their work for a while. It's like, I get to test for them. They must have seen something they liked in my work. So I try to hold on to those moments and realize, just like you said, there's so much going on behind the scenes. You have no idea why you weren't chosen. And 99% of the time, it has nothing to do with your work not being good enough. So that's just something I think just personally, internally, you kind of have to keep yourself in check with.
Mm-hmm. And I have had pattern testers who I try really hard, and not all designers do this. So I don't know that this is something that people can necessarily expect, but I respond to everyone who applies. Also, I don't get 500 people who apply to my test, so that makes that a lot easier. But I respond to everybody yes and no because of my own personal experience in testing and having thought like, well, I guess I didn't get chosen for that test. And then like a week later, then being like, surprise.
Yeah. And now I've applied for 5 more that I'm
too. Yes. So I try to respond to everybody. And I have had people respond back who really are committed to really wanting to pattern test, to say and say to me like, can you tell me why I wasn't chosen? And do you have any tips on how I could maybe improve my work to get chosen in the future? And some designers I think would be very open to that. I think some designers would probably give some non-committal answer because like that's too much confrontation. But or even maybe if you're applying for lots of pattern tests and you're not getting chosen, maybe reach out to somebody who does a lot of pattern testing and just say, could you look at my work and maybe give me some tips?
I
The
think
other
that's
thing
great.
is, it's amazing, and I will say it sometimes feels super special to test for really big designers.
Mhm.
But oftentimes those large designers are also some of the busiest people
That's
and
true.
don't necessarily have time to like hold the hand of somebody who's brand new or have a lot of
Yeah.
communication about those sorts of things. So maybe search out a smaller designer or somebody who's kind of just getting started themselves to apply for tests and kind of get your feet wet, because they maybe tend to have a little more time and interest
Right.
in, and not that the larger designers are, too high and mighty. I've talked to some of them and they're very nice, but they're very busy people. You get to be a
Mhm.
very large designer by being very productive and doing all the things.
But a lot of them have full-time jobs too, and I don't know how some of these people crank out all these brand new patterns and work a full-time job. I mean, that
Yeah.
kudos to them. I am not that good with time management.
Yeah,
I might be a
yeah.
planner, but I'm not that good.
Or are raising and homeschooling 5
Yes.
children, or
Yeah.
have all these things going on. And that's the other thing, we never know what's going on in designers'
Yeah.
lives. And um, you know but generally speaking, I think they're mostly nice people and approachable people, and if they have the time to respond, a lot of them are happy to have conversations with people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great that you respond to everyone. That's rare. I've only had that a couple of times where I've gotten responses when I wasn't chosen. And I think that's great. I'd love to hear that people are reaching back out to you for tips. And it sounds to me like you're open to giving those tips. Not sure. That's just what it sounds like. But yeah, I think that's really great. But I also don't fault designers who don't do that either. I completely understand. I mean, it is a general practice to just respond to the ones who who apply. So that's fine too. Uh, so I have a question for you. So I
Okay.
believe you and I met on a pattern test a couple of years ago.
Oh gosh. Okay.
I believe it was for Ashley at Wish Upon a Hook. Did you do the
Oh,
garden path beanie?
did I
And
see, this is a good question because I test a lot for Ashley.
I
It's
I'm
it's
pretty
very
sure
possible.
that's I'm
Yes,
pretty
I
sure that's
probably did.
Mhm. But now I'm curious for you because I know a lot of designers do pattern tester calls differently. Some put them on Instagram, like you said, and it's more of a first come. Like you have to actually catch their tester call. Some of them just everybody applies right away and they close it before you even see it. Others have
Uh-huh.
email lists. So I have never tested for you, but I might have some interest. So I was wondering, how do you find pattern testers? Do you do the posts or your own email list?
That is a great question. I usually I usually find my pattern testers in two ways. I post calls on the Pattern Tester Facebook page. I don't know if you're a part of that, but
I
that's
have not.
a Facebook group. And I don't know that I have, but I'll add the link below, and I'll add the link to your Instagram too, so people can go follow you. But I put out tester calls to there. I love to have new people test for me.
Mhm.
I find it so valuable to have fresh eyes on my
Yeah.
patterns. And so I love that's the main way that I gather people who have never tested for me before. Um, but I also started to learn as I got some experience that it's also important to have a couple tried and true people on
Mhm.
every test.
Yep, I would agree with that. I can totally understand.
um, because every once in a while you put out a test, and every person's feedback is it was perfect, and I'm like, never have I been perfect, so I
Yeah.
can't imagine that that's true. So I also have a place to sign up for an email list, and I'll be real honest, I have two email lists. I have a list that anybody can sign up for, and then you will get all of my tester calls straight to your
Mhm.
inbox. If you have tested for me previously and you have done a really magnificent job, I will invite you to what I call my star tester email list.
Mm.
And those are people that are my tried and trues. They're the people who always show up on time with great feedback and super attention to detail. Um, typically that's like my main driving force. There are a few people in there that always show up, with amazing pictures,
Right.
which has its own kind of utility as a designer. So two places that anybody can find my pattern test, and then one little like group of my tried and true warriors that I feel like I can always go to, and
I
and
think
they,
that's
they
right. I
always
think that's
respond for me.
That's right. Well, I've been on other tests too, where a lot of, like you said, a lot of people they have the same question maybe, and someone else will join in and say, "Hey, I test for this designer a lot. Typically, they do this," and so they offer just some background sometimes, which I think is
Mhm.
helpful. And that's
Yeah.
another thing I actually really love about pattern testing is just meeting other designers. You meet them, and then that's how I've gotten more pattern tests. Anytime I'm in a group, I follow everyone in the group, and then I get to see their work. I get to see what they've made if they don't share it in the group, and it's just been really fun to get to know some people that way. And someday maybe I'll meet some of them who don't live who don't live anywhere near me, but it's been fun. I would love to do that someday whenever I'm traveling. I feel like anytime I travel, I'm like, do I know anybody on Instagram who lives there? I will totally be that weird person who's like, hey, come meet me for coffee.
I'm there.
All
I'm
right.
there. I love it. I actually have a couple, I have all sorts of friends on Instagram who don't live close to me, some
Yep.
who don't even live in the same country as me. And I'm gathering a real collection of people in England.
Oh,
And I'm really thinking like I got to come over there someday, and we just have to have a
yes.
big party where you all have to come together and meet me in person because I love you all so much.
I think you should do it. I think that's a great idea.
But
That's
yeah, I agree. I'm like, oh, who do I know that lives there? Or where could I go that maybe this would be close and a little group of us could get
yeah.
together?
That was one thing I do love about social media. It has its challenges, but just getting to meet people and connect with people that don't live around you.
Mhm.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm a stepmom, and I don't really have many stepmom friends, and so I actually met another stepmom through a stepmom match program, and she lives about 45 minutes from me, and we text all the time, but we've never met in person. We text, we know all about each other's families. When we need advice or we're frustrated with something, like we know the other one understands, and I just love it. It's the same thing with some of my yarn friends. I'm like, well, you understand all the yarn, my yarn challenges. I know that sounds it sounds horrible, but yes, they
No, I'm
understand the challenge of all the new colorways coming out. Even though you have 6 orders outstanding, you just have to have this one.
yes, yeah. And I feel like when you first join the social media yarn community, it can be really, I know that I felt like everybody else has like people,
Yep.
and I don't have the people. How do you find the
Yeah,
people? And pattern testing is a great way to do that. You will find
absolutely.
if you pattern test around a little bit that you come across the same people a
Yeah,
lot of times, and sometimes you can just kind of see, depending on the test. A lot of times there's like a chat group which allows you to kind of get to know the other
yeah,
people, and depending on the designer, and sometimes depending on the test, bigger tests like garments and stuff, it's a little hard to get chatty in those
yeah,
groups because there's so much to discuss about such a large pattern. But a lot of
right.
times people will say like, oh, I'm going away for the weekend and I'm going to take it with me. And people say, oh, where are you going? Oh, I'm visiting
Yeah,
my nephew. Oh, how old is, and it can be a great way to really get to know people.
absolutely. I was in a test recently where someone else in the test used this yarn, and they posted a picture of their finished product, and I thought, oh, I just love that yarn. And so I asked, okay, what is this yarn? And so she sends me the info on the yarn, and she said, the only place you can get it is Joann's. So I look at Joann's, and it's discontinued. And so I responded, I was like, thank you. Oh, it's discontinued. I'm so sad. And so she says, well, send me your address and I'll send you some. And then she sends me a private message, and she sent me the yarn. And now we talk all the time. We text. I've never met her, but still to this day, I'll get a random package with yarn. She's like,
Ah.
she's my yarn fairy.
I love it. That's so sweet. There are so many amazing and generous people in the
Yep,
yarn community.
absolutely.
And yeah, and I mean, pattern testers, a lot of the times they're super kind and generous because they're donating their time and their
Yeah.
energy and their skills to the designers. So yeah, pattern testing is a great way to start to build your community.
Yep, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's how it was when I first started. I was like, how do I meet people?
Yeah. And if
So,
you don't have a local yarn store, I have a wonderful local yarn shop. And so I have been really lucky to meet like people in person.
oh no, yeah.
But if you don't have
Yeah,
that, where do you go to meet people who do
right.
what you do locally? It can be really
Absolutely.
challenging.
Well, I'm glad that you told me about the pattern, you said the pattern tester Facebook group. I tend to think that all the yarn stuff lives on Instagram and that Instagram is where everything is. So I do forget about Facebook sometimes. I'm most designers or yarn friends that I follow on Facebook, I already know them on Instagram, but I for some reason I just don't think to go to Facebook first. I just think it all lives on Instagram sometimes. So I need to start looking at the Facebook stuff now. So that's what
And
I'm
there are lots of Facebook groups out there for
yeah.
pattern testing. I love the pattern testers Facebook group because the administrators of that are both testers and designers, and they have really honed
Okay.
what information the designer needs to give out to best communicate with pattern testers, what their expectations and needs
Right.
are. And then they also regulate the pattern testers themselves. If they don't follow through, there are rules that you can
Oh,
be
that's
removed from
good.
the group and stuff. So it's not just a free for all on either side, on the designer
Right.
side or on the pattern tester side. They've really focused in to try to make it a really good group for everybody. So I love that
Yeah.
one.
I'm gonna have to check that one out.
I love it. All right. I'm going to ask you some this or that questions.
Okay.
Okay. Are you a book or a podcast person? Or
I
neither?
would have said podcast, but this year one of my goals has been to read more. So I've been trying to read, but I guess I'm gonna have to say podcast because I love listening to podcasts in the car.
Yes. Yes. Do you have a podcast you would recommend?
I don't have a yarn one. I listen
That's okay.
to right now. I've been listening to a lot of like stepmom podcasts, and
Ah,
I have another podcast. Actually, I do kind of recommend this one. It's Love and Life with Dr. Karen. I just love just she's a psychologist, and so she talks a lot about relationships, and I can identify with her. She was 42, I think, when she got married for the first time. She's also a stepmom, which is how I found her. But it's all just about relationships and just dealing with not just like romantic relationships, but family relationships, kids, stepkids. I just find it really, really interesting. I find the psychology behind it all interesting. So that's one of my favorites right now.
I love it. I listen to many a podcast. I'm not sure I listen to any yarn podcasts. To be real honest. Maybe a couple here or there, but yeah, I love podcasts too. Do you prefer a cardigan or a sweater?
I'm definitely a cardigan girl. I always have one with me. In the winter, I'm always cold. And then in the summer, I'm hot outside. And the minute I walk into someplace, I live in the South and they blast the air conditioning. So I have a cardigan with me even in the summer.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. If you're going to grab a snack, is it going to be salty or sweet?
Salty. My husband and stepson are all about the sweets, and sweet just doesn't do it for me. I'm more of a salty girl.
I love it. I love it.
Mm.
What is worse, swatching or weaving in ends?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm probably going to go with swatching. I know it's necessary, excuse me, especially on garments, but I don't love it.
Yeah. I hate weaving in ends, but like there's a finite, like you get to a point where you're done no matter what.
Right.
You only have the ends to weave in that you started with. They don't multiply. But meeting gauge sometimes
Oh,
can feel
yes.
like a never-ending rabbit hole.
Yes, especially when you have to block it. So you make it, you block it, you make it, you block it. And
Yep.
sometimes I make 3 and block them all because I don't want to wait a week to find out which one.
That's genius. I think
But
that's
it
so
needs more
smart.
swatching though, but that's probably why I hate
Sure.
swatching, because if you do make 3 of them and then you find out the first one you made was perfect anyway, then you're like, oh.
Sure. Sure. Oh my goodness. I love it. Amy, it has been so much fun chatting with you. Thank you so
You.
much for joining me. You have such wonderful perspective on pattern testing and the yarn community, and it's just been great chatting.
Thank you. I had so much fun. I was a little nervous when you first asked me, but I don't know, I just felt like I was chatting with a friend.
I'm so glad to hear that. I love it, and I hope that we will chat more in the future.
I hope so too. I'm going to now have to go stalk your page and find out how to get on your pattern testing list, email list.
There we go. It's link in the bio.
Perfect. I will be there. You'll see me.
Yay. I feel very honored. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Oh my goodness, another wonderful test. Amy has such great perspective and really just amazing advice on pattern testing and the yarn community and all the things. I am so blessed to have her join me and share this information and conversation and get to know her a little better. Always fun to chat with new people. There are links in the description below. There's a link to Amy's Instagram if you want to go over there and give her a follow. She does all sorts of beautiful tests. Even if you aren't interested in pattern testing, go give her a follow and see all the beautiful things that she makes and that you might want to make as well. And then I'll link to the pattern testers page down below as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do lots of Meet the Maker things. And like I said, it's all about pattern testing this month. So I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, and then YouTube will let you know every time we do one of these. And give this a like and share with a friend if you think they'd enjoy seeing it. Thank you again for joining me, and happy crafting.